The grand conference hall at the University of Chicago Law School was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from politeness, but the heavy, electric quiet that falls when something extraordinary is about to happen. Judge Richard Posner, one of America's most brilliant and feared legal minds, sat behind the podium. His sharp eyes that had torn apart thousands of legal arguments, were locked on one person, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Moments ago, he had dismissed her, laughed off her questions, called her, in front of hundreds, a politician pretending to be a lawyer. Now, the entire room was holding its breath, because Jasmine Crockett was about to change everything. Judge Posner, she began calmly, her voice steady, confident, and professional. You questioned my legal credentials. You suggested I'm just a politician who claims to understand the law. A pause, her eyes locked on his. Well, allow me to share something with you, and with this distinguished audience, that might change your mind. The tension in the hall was suffocating. Law students leaned forward, professors adjusted their glasses, and legal journalists pressed record. Everyone knew this was no longer a debate. It was a showdown. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand who these two people are. Judge Richard Posner, a towering figure in American law. Over 3,000 judicial opinions, 40 books, and a mind sharper than a scalpel. For decades, he shaped how America thinks about justice. But he also held one unshakable belief, that most politicians who call themselves lawyers are frauds. In his words, they wear the title, but not the truth. And sitting across from him now was Jasmine Crockett, a civil rights attorney turned congresswoman from Texas. Sharp, fearless, a woman who had built her career fighting for equality, justice, and the forgotten. What Judge Posner didn't know was that Crockett hadn't left the courtroom behind. She had brought it with her. The session had started simply, a symposium titled Law and Politics in Modern America. Judge Posner gave his keynote speech, criticizing political lawyers for abandoning real legal thinking. When the Q&A began, Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the microphone. Her question was precise, informed, and referenced a recent Supreme Court case. But Posner barely looked at her. He smirked. "Congresswoman," he said, "politicians rarely grasp the true complexities of constitutional law." The audience chuckled uneasily. She tried again, another sharp, legally grounded question, and this time he cut her off completely. "You're what I'd call a fake lawyer," he said coldly. "Yes, you have a degree, but you're a politician now. You've abandoned serious legal thought for political theater." A gasp rippled through the room. Students froze. Professors exchanged nervous glances. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She smiled softly. Then she walked back to her seat, picked up a thick folder, and returned to the microphone. The sound of her heels echoed through the hall like a drumbeat of defiance. "Judge Posner," she said, "I think this is the perfect opportunity to discuss what real legal practice actually looks like." She opened the folder. Inside were stacks of neatly arranged documents, color-tabbed and bound like formal court filings. "This," she said, holding up the first file, "is Henderson v. Texas Department of Education. I argued this case before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just 3 months ago." The audience leaned in. "This brief," she continued, "was written by me. Every line, every argument. It cites 47 federal cases and presents new constitutional analysis on equal protection. The panel accepted our reasoning unanimously." Judge Posner blinked, the first crack in his composure. She pulled out another file. 6 months ago, I represented a coalition of voting rights advocates in Martinez v. Dallas County. Here's the motion for a preliminary injunction, drafted personally by me." She placed it on the table with a soft thud. The judge not only granted our motion, but also commended the clarity of our legal reasoning. By now, whispers filled the room. Law students scribbled notes furiously. Professors leaned forward, stunned. And Judge Posner? He was silent, eyes fixed on the papers. Crockett raised the last document. "This one," she said, "I think you'll find most interesting. It was a thick, bound petition. Stamped. Official. Thompson vs. Federal Bureau of Prisons. Filed with the United States Supreme Court. Just 3 weeks ago. The room gasped. Even the cameraman froze. This petition challenges federal prison conditions under the Eighth Amendment, she continued. It required months of constitutional research and was accepted for filing by the Supreme Court clerk, without a single correction. Judge Posner leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The legend of American law was impressed. Scene 8. The silence breaks. Jasmine Crockett placed the final document on the podium. Her voice lowered, controlled but cutting. You said I was a fake lawyer. You said I'd traded legal reasoning for politics. She paused, gestured to the pile of evidence. What I've shown you are active cases, filed motions, and federal victories. This isn't theater. This is the law, practiced at its highest level. The silence that followed lasted a lifetime. Then, for the first time in his career, Judge Richard Posner lowered his head. When he finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable. Congresswoman Crockett, he began slowly, I owe you an apology. The room exhaled all at once. Law students glanced at one another in disbelief. When I called you a fake lawyer, Posner continued, I relied on assumption, not evidence. And that's the very thing I've spent my life teaching others not to do. I was wrong, and I was unfair. Crockett nodded respectfully. Apology accepted, Judge, she said softly. But I think this moment represents something larger than us both. She turned to the audience, her tone now powerful and reflective. How many brilliant lawyers are dismissed, she said, because they don't fit someone else's mold? How many sharp legal minds are underestimated because they choose to serve in unconventional roles? She paused, letting every word sink in. True legal brilliance isn't about titles. It's about commitment, integrity, and courage. Judge Posner looked at her. Truly looked at her. The arrogance was gone. What remained was respect. He nodded slowly. You've reminded me, he said, that the law isn't just written in books or courtrooms. It's lived through people like you. The audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the hall. Reporters rushed to capture the moment, and Jasmine Crockett, the woman who was once dismissed as just a politician, stood unshaken, a symbol of resilience and intellect. That day, Judge Richard Posner's words were remembered not for their criticism, but for his humility. And Jasmine Crockett's calm defiance became a story told in every law school across the country. A story about bias, brilliance, and the courage to prove the truth. Because sometimes, the loudest arguments are won not with words, but with evidence.